question. If you ask my boss that question, he'd probably say that to play rugby league, you need to learn how to tackle. But I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. In fact, rugby union and rugby league were one and the same game when they first started back in 1885 in England. Back then, there was a split in the game. The teams that played in the north of England in around Yorkshire were paying their players because they had to miss work to play games. And the hierarchy in London weren't real impressed with that kind of attitude. So there was a real split between the groups and they went their separate ways. One became the English Rugby Union and one became Rugby League. And from that day, pretty much through to the early 1980s, they were indeed, the Rugby Union was known as the amateur code and Rugby League was known as the professional code. Today, thankfully, both codes are games which you can earn a living from. In terms of rules and the way the games are played, they are very similar, but there are also a lot of differences. A couple of the major differences that I'd like to highlight here today is that first and foremost, in rugby union, there is no requirement for the defence to be back 10 metres. So in our game, they're further apart, and that hopefully promotes more attacking opportunities for our teams to score tries and play a more attractive style football code. The second thing is, in rugby union, they have a ruck or a contest for the ball at every point of tackle. And in rugby league, we don't do this. We just get up and play the ball, and each team competes with the football for a set of 6 tackles before they have to hand the ball over to the opposition. Finally, probably the other major difference that I would talk about is when a ball crosses the sideline, how that ball then comes back into play. In rugby union, they have a thing called a line out, which is a competition where the ball is thrown into the middle of the 2 opposing teams. In rugby league, we go for what we call a turnover, so possession is pretty much just handed to the opposition team for them to start, and we feel this gives us more opportunity for the game to flow and to make the game faster than what rugby union could be played. So as a contact sport, our main focus has obviously got to be on player safety and player welfare. We take that very seriously. And then aside from that, like every other sport, we then concentrate on player enjoyment, teamwork, camaraderie, and those kind of aspects of sport in general. If I could just make one point, that there seems to get a lot of confusion with the game of rugby league that kids play at junior level is completely different and nowhere near the game that is seen on TV week in, week out. They're completely different. They're completely regulated, rules are different. So some of the modifications that we do, we modify rules by different age groups. So for example, in our under 6s and our under 7s, our youngest children that play the game, we play 6-a-side matches on very small fields, and we don't penalise the children if they drop the ball or they run over the sideline. We just let them come on and play the ball again and move on with that kind of thing. When we progress through our 8s and 9s and 10s and 11s, we add more players to the field in progressive steps, which is the best form of developmental pathway for the kids to acquire the skills required as they get older. And indeed, we don't have 13-a-side rugby league games until kids turn 13 years of age. And then even at 13, they're still playing under modified rules of the game. One of those rules that we all stick to is a strict code of conduct and strict safe play code that we have in our game. And we have a rule that no game will kick off until such time as we have our qualified first aid officer at the venue ready to look after the kids. Under our safe play code, all tackles need to be underneath the player's armpits, so we don't get anywhere up near the head or neck area. Players can't be lifted off the ground in tackles or jump when they're running and that sort of stuff. There's no shoulder charges. When I have the football, I can't use my hand to palm away from an opposition player. And finally, one of the rules we don't have scrums. and that all our participants, regardless of who they are or where they play or who they play for, they all must get a minimum set of game time. So every child gets every opportunity to play our game. Obviously, a lot of technology was used for a lot of our courses this year. The first point I'd make here is that all of our coaches, all of our referees, all of our sports trainers, all of our ground managers need to hold a relevant accreditation, which is consonant to the age group which they're actually coaching. So if you're coaching some of the younger kids, you need an intermediate games coaching certificate. If you're coaching older kids, there's a more advanced coaching course that's available. All of our coaches have put through tackle safe techniques in their training and their relevant courses, and all of our courses are actually linked to the National Coaching Accreditation Scheme, which is overseen by the Australian Institute for the Sport. For our referees, once they have done their online learnings and tests and pass those tests, they then will be directed to a local association of referees where they'll receive further training and education and be assigned to an actual personal coach who will watch them when they first start doing their games and that kind of thing, so that they're comfortable with what they're doing. On the sports safety side of things, all our sports trainers need to obtain a level of certification. We have three predominant levels of accreditation. First being a league safe course, which is a basic injury awareness and basic injury skill type course. From there we have a level 1 sports trainer who always must be available at a match, as I said earlier, and they'll be very proficient in first aid and also specific rugby league type medical issues. And then thirdly, in our performance pathways, and particularly our older teams, is a level 2 sports trainer who are quite proficient with injury management, injury treatment and that kind of thing. So inclusion is something that Rugby League has worked really hard on over the last 3 or 4 years, and we've been successful in putting out some tri-league programs to different communities and things like that. And I just implore, particularly the mothers out there who